are. Do you have those numbers in terms of what rate of imprisonment we are?
We are locking up more than 2 million people in the United States. Now, to put that into some kind of perspective, it took us more than 200 years to lock up the first million. And it's just over the past 35 years that we've locked up the second million. To give you an idea of the rapid expansion of our prison population, during the 1990s and early 2000s, we were building on average a prison a week in the United States. Incredible amount of prison expansion. And as soon as they were built, they were rapidly filled up with people, with prisoners. And again, most of it, the engine behind all of this is the drug war.
Yeah, the drug population in the prisons is very big. And the numbers are pretty stark, too. We have about 23% of the people in the world who are imprisoned total. There's about 10 million people who are in prison across the entire world. And of those 10 million, 2.2 million of them are Americans, which gives us nearly 25%. In terms of the way that we do this, in terms of crime rates, we usually talk in 100 per 100,000 people. And the current U.S. prison population, and this is both prison and jail, jail being a more temporary type of incarceration than prison, is about 707 per 100,000 people, which is about 200 more than that bastion of freedom, Russia, who comes in second, or Rwanda, depending on those bastions of freedom. So that means that we need to start thinking about whether or not America is land of the free in that sense.
Yeah, another way I've heard it expressed is that the U.S. has about 5% of the world's population, but we have, as you said, about 25% of the world's prisoners. And this does raise immediate questions about, this is supposed to be the land of the free, and it raises that basic question about why is it that this country needs to lock up so many people? And we really need to humanize it a little bit because, you hear about these statistics, but again, behind these numbers is basically what's going on is you're taking a human being and you're saying this person needs to be put into a cage. He needs to be put behind very tall barbed wire fences. Why do we need to put so many of those people in those types of facilities? It really is very troubling.
But, of course, obvious response would be if the crime rate was going up, and many people believe that it has been going up, but if the crime rate was going up, then you probably should have more people in prison. Does that explain the prison population?
Well, what I say is I think there is a connection between locking people up and the crime rate. But what needs to be said is that if you take somebody who his plan for the day is to go mug people. If you take that person off the streets and out of the neighborhoods and you put him in a prison cell, that's going to have an impact on crime in the neighborhood. If you lock up a rapist or you lock up somebody who, again, he's a career criminal and what he does every day or every week is break into somebody's home to steal things. If you lock these types of people up, it is going to have an impact on crime. But if you take somebody like a teenager who is selling drugs on the corners in Baltimore or in Los Angeles, and you take a person like that and you put them in a prison cell, it doesn't have any impact at all on the drug trade. And that is what has been going on. We're taking tens of thousands of people like that and putting them in our prison facilities, and it's really not having any impact on the drug trade. That is a thriving black market today, as it has been for years.
And interestingly, the crime rate has always been a big driver of this, but in an interesting way. So starting about the late 60s up through the early 90s, crime went up pretty quickly. And actually between 74 and 84, the murder rate doubled in the country. So if you look at prison population numbers in 1972, we had about 161 per 100,000 people in prison. And by 2007, we had 767. What isn't seen in that data, though, is that starting in about 93, 94, the crime rate started plummeting. And then there was a huge divergence between the prison rate, which was still going up, and the crime rate, which was going down, and is still actually going down, even though Pew polls and other polls show that most people believe it's still going up. So crime rate does not actually explain the reason for this incarceration. The main way you explain it is the creation of new crimes in the sense of the drug war and then some other expansion of the federal criminal code. The enforcement without leniency of putting more people in prison for doing those crimes, and then the higher punitive nature of the sentences that are being applied to those crimes, mandatory minimums, three-strike laws, all those things create the constellation. And, of course, the fact that for the longest time there was never the voters always voted for more criminal enforcement. What could be the downside of voting for more criminal enforcement?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the politicians pandered to fear over crime, and every single congressional term it was another crime package where they were saying that these measures, mandatory minimums, more penalties, more prosecutors were necessary in order to address the crime problem. And there was just that never-ending expansion of the criminal justice system, all under this rubric of being tough on crime. We sometimes compare the drug war to the dangerous experiment with alcohol prohibition. And one thing we have to remember from that experience is that when we ended alcohol prohibition, the violent crime rate in the country declined for 10 straight years. And so even though the crime rate has been going down in this country, I think we would see even further declines in violent crime once we were to move away from the drug war, because we do have these rival gangs that do fight one another from time to time in order to get control over the lucrative drug territory. Of course, we're hearing more about the horrendous violence in Mexico and Central America, but that violence sometimes creeps over to the border into our cities like Los Angeles, where the Crips and the Bloods fight one another.
The thing that's really hard to measure, too, is the violent crime or other related crime that doesn't seem to be drug-related but is drug-related, and people have tried to figure out you have a certain amount of people in prison for drug crimes, drug-related crimes. But then you also might have someone in prison for robbery, but the reason he was robbing someplace is because that he needed money to get heroin, which produces more prison population. And some of the numbers that we had, at least on the federal level, in 1980, the drug-related imprisonment rate on a federal level was 3 per 100,000. And by 2000, it was 35 per 100,000, which is a 10 times increase that was all concurrent with the war on drugs, with Reagan's escalation and public education programs. All that concurrent didn't seem to decrease the amount of drug users.
Yeah, that's right. And the other perverse consequence of the drug war is that, we've got these drug offenders in prison right now, and they're there with these mandatory minimum penalties of, 10, 15, 20 years.